if you're currently paying 30% more for groceries than you did 2 years ago, or if the dream of owning a home feels further away than ever before, this video is not just history, it's a warning. The struggle you feel right now is not a modern mistake. It is the direct consequence of a 2,000-year-old financial trick, a blueprint perfected by emperors and governments to quietly bankrupt you while funding their own endless ambition. You think inflation is a bug in the system? No. It is the silent, efficient tax that has destroyed every great empire in history. Hit that subscribe button, because what we are about to uncover is the hidden cost embedded in every single coin and banknote, a cost that has always been paid by the ordinary person. If you can track this pattern of inflation across 2 millennia, you can finally see the trap and build true financial resilience. When people look at the ruins of great civilizations, from the Roman Forum to the shattered dreams of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they imagine massive military defeats or political corruption. They rarely look at the treasury. They rarely see the quiet, invisible process that hollowed out the entire structure from the inside. They miss the single most corrosive force that has ended every major epoch of Western power: the debasement of currency. Inflation is not merely rising prices. It is the systematic, deliberate destruction of the average citizen's savings, a policy weapon deployed by rulers throughout history to fund the hidden cost of empire. And the greatest lesson for you today, for every single person struggling with the cost of living in London, New York, or Sydney, is that the playbook has never changed. You are being subjected to the same financial warfare that bankrupted the citizens of ancient Rome. For nearly 300 years, the Roman denarius was the bedrock of the Western world. First minted around 211 before Christ, this silver coin was the gold standard of its time, a symbol of trust and permanence. It contained approximately 95% pure silver. Soldiers were paid with it. Merchants demanded it for trade across the vast network of Roman roads, from Britannia to Egypt. A Roman citizen's wealth was literally held in metal, a tangible, universally accepted asset. The value of the empire and the value of its money were one and the same. As long as you held a denarius, you held a piece of Rome's promise, a guarantee of real value. This was the era of stability, the Pax Romana, built on a currency that was nearly incorruptible. But running an empire, especially one that spans 3 continents, is staggeringly expensive. Legions had to be paid constantly. Wars had to be financed on multiple distant fronts. Massive public works, the aqueducts and the roads we still marvel at today, demanded colossal funds. Eventually, tax revenues, even from a vast empire, could not keep pace with the costs of maintaining that global dominance. So the emperors faced a political dilemma. They could raise taxes openly, a move that would immediately spark public outrage and rebellion, risking their power. Or they could turn to the age-old trick, the silent tax, the invisible wealth transfer debasement. The process was slow, insidious, and brilliant in its manipulation. Rather than changing the denomination or printing a new currency, which would signal panic, the emperors simply began reducing the actual silver content of the coin, replacing the difference with cheaper base metals like copper. They diluted the money supply. This meant they could strike more coins from the same amount of silver. The number of coins increased, allowing the government to pay its soldiers and contractors. But the intrinsic value of every single coin in circulation diminished. The numbers are terrifying because they track a steady, predictable path to collapse. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius was 95% silver. A century later, under Nero, it was already down to 90%. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century after Christ, the silver content had been slashed in half, dropping to around 50%. But the emperors were locked in a destructive cycle. The less the coin was worth, the more the government needed to spend to achieve the same result, necessitating further debasement. The political cost of not debasing the currency, paying the legions with honest silver, and risking bankruptcy, was deemed greater than the slow, quiet destruction of the civilian economy. By the time of Emperor Gallienus in the mid-3rd century, the silver denarius had become a pathetic disc of bronze coated with a thin, almost cosmetic wash of silver. It contained less than 5% silver. A currency that had defined global commerce for centuries had become a shell. The consequences for the ordinary Roman citizen were devastating, mirroring the pain felt by working families in London, New York, or Sydney today. The illusion could not last. As people realized they were trading goods and labor for worthless metal, confidence evaporated. This loss of trust triggered the inevitable consequence: runaway inflation. Prices exploded. A measure of wheat that might have cost 1 denarius suddenly cost dozens. Farmers, the backbone of the economy, saw their incomes dissolve, their taxes demanded in coins that were worthless. Soldiers, the very force the debasement was meant to pacify, saw their paychecks shrink in purchasing power and demanded astronomical raises just to feed their families. The economy fractured. Merchants stopped accepting the debased coins, preferring to revert to clumsy, inefficient barter systems or demanding payment in reliable gold, which hoarded value as the paper currency collapsed. The money was no longer a reliable anchor of value, and when money fails, society itself begins to unravel. Tax collection became a disaster. Trade networks broke down. Cities that relied on the organized flow of commerce began to starve. The Roman government's response, perfectly illustrating the arrogance of power throughout history, was not to restore the currency but to impose price controls. In 301 after Christ, Emperor Diocletian issued the infamous edict on maximum prices, attempting to fix the cost of everything from grain to wages to services, with violators facing the penalty of death. It was a futile act of economic tyranny. Prices cannot be controlled by decree when the money itself is a lie. The law was ignored, the black market flourished, and official trade collapsed entirely. People learned quickly that the law couldn't force value back into a broken coin. The collapse of the denarius led directly to the crisis of the 3rd century, a catastrophic period of 50 years that saw civil wars, splintering kingdoms, plagues, and total economic meltdown. The outside barbarians simply finished off a corpse already financially dead. The lesson is undeniable. The debasement of currency is the true hidden cost of an over-leveraged, overextended empire, and that cost is always paid in the lost wealth and shattered savings of the ordinary trusting citizen. Every single time a politician today promises to spend money the government does not have, the echo of that denarius debasement should ring in your ears. The ultimate destruction of the Western Roman Empire was not a single dramatic event. It was a centuries-long grinding bankruptcy, a slow-motion transfer of wealth from the productive populace to the ruling elite through the mechanism of inflation. The small savers, the middle-class farmers and merchants who held their capital in the government's coin were the ones who bled first. The elites who owned land, who traded in gold, who had political connections, they were the ones who protected their wealth and emerged richer. This is the pattern. It is the core financial DNA of collapse. And you must understand that this pattern did not die with Rome. It simply evolved, adapting its language and its tools, moving from the metallic debasement of the coin to the invisible, limitless debasement of the printing press and the digital ledger. The story continues, and the most shocking part is that the modern, English-speaking world, built upon the ideals of stable finance and global trade, replicated this precise destructive mechanism. The hidden cost of empire is eternal. The question is, can you see the trick before your own savings become the final casualty of this ancient, hidden cost? The lesson of Rome, that once you untether money from a tangible anchor of value, it becomes a weapon of manipulation, was learned but never truly accepted. For centuries, the memory of that chaos enforced a certain financial discipline, leading to the eventual return to hard money, usually gold. By the 19th century, the British pound sterling, anchored to the gold standard, was the new global currency, powering the expansion of the modern industrial world. Yet the hidden cost of empire was just waiting for a crisis to re-emerge. That crisis was World War I. In 1914, Britain and other major powers faced costs that were financially impossible. The ambition of empire once again outpaced the reality of the treasury. In a move that mirrored the desperation of the later Roman emperors, the major powers, one by one, quietly abandoned the gold standard. They suspended the rules, effectively admitting that their money was no longer backed by a physical, real asset. It was now simply a promise, backed by nothing more than faith in the state and the power of the printing press. This single moment, the breaking of the gold anchor, was the most critical financial shift of the modern era. It was the moment the ancient trick of debasement was scaled up from chipping silver off a coin to printing limitless paper currency. The money for the war was raised not by honest taxation, but through massive, relentless bond drives. Propaganda posters urged citizens to pour their savings into war loans, equating debt purchase with patriotism and sacrifice. This was the modern-day forced loan, coercion disguised as duty. For defeated nations like Germany, those bonds became worthless, wiping out the life savings of millions and breeding the bitterness that fueled extremism. The small saver once again bled first. The American century began, not on the battlefield, but in the ledger sheets of bankers who financed the war, transforming the U.S. from a debtor nation to the world's largest creditor, holding the largest gold reserves. But the pattern of inflation and debt had now become institutionalized. The cycle that traps you today was cemented in 1971. Just like the Roman emperors who diluted the denarius under stress, the U.S. government, under President Nixon, faced a growing financial strain from war and spending. Foreign governments began demanding their gold back. In August 1971, Nixon slammed the door shut, officially ending the dollarish link to gold, the quiet revolution that severed money from any tangible reality forever. Debt was now untethered, transformed from something finite into something infinite. Central banks gained the freedom to print and borrow at will, limited only by the fragile faith of the public. This is the financial ecosystem you live in today, a world where governments borrow trillions as if it were nothing, and central banks conjure new money with keystrokes. Every crisis rescue since then has required more leverage, more debt, and more inflation than the last. This debt is not harmless. It distorts behavior, creates asset bubbles, and most importantly, it enslaves future generations by claiming tomorrow's work for today's spending. The politicians, like the emperors before them, love debt and inflation because it buys them time. Inflation is the subtle tool that reduces the real value of that debt, making their obligations bearable, but only by eroding the real value of your savings.